Hello and welcome back to the Imperfectly Empowered podcast. I am your host, Anna Fulmer. Today we have Davidson Hung on the show. Davidson is the founder and owner of the Daring Hearts Mentorship Program, where he helps men and women conquer self-criticism and create bold impact. Having grown up without a silver spoon, Davidson's pursuit of personal growth and leadership wasn't born out of privilege, but out of necessity. Whether writing his fourth book, Trekking the Great Outdoors, or sharing inspiration on his YouTube channel with an audience of 700,000, Davidson isn't just living life, he is devouring it, one adventure at a time. Here to share his expert advice on conquering self criticism to craft a life of bold impact. Welcome, Davidson. Davidson, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Your website,
Yeah.
your social media, everything looks amazing. So just want to
Oh,
commend you
thank
on the
you.
intentionality and the design and
Hmm.
yeah, just excited to be here.
Thank you so much. Davidson and I were just lamenting over the rain. He lives in Jersey. We're in Pennsylvania. It's been raining for days. Our roads are flooded. Oh, it's one of those days. So here we are. We're mutually, this is like going to be a little chat beside a fire with hot chocolate, even though I don't have the fire or the hot chocolate.
Yeah, I'm excited to do
I
this
do have
with
a
you.
blanket. Um, you have such a fun brand. I love what you do. There's so many elements to it that are really fun. Just the the label Daring Hearts, just in general, is like speaks to my Enneagram 8. That like challenger in me. I'm like, Daring Hearts, what a
Uh,
great title. Um,
yeah.
but we'll press rewind a little bit. You talk about kind of how you even got to this point in your own life and in your own career of embracing this concept of trying to conquer self-criticism in order to create bold impact. Is That's kind of like the tagline that I see over your brand and your passion. um Talk to me a little bit about how you arrived at this passion. You've mentioned that you grew up poor and also faced the struggles of um, growing up as a minority, as an Asian American, which clearly, as you can see here, not a very white, very European, and so that's something I just can't understand. So I would love to
Mhm.
hear kind of how your growing up shaped who you
Hmm.
are today and how that fuels your passion.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a male, obviously, right? So that's all it comes with its own
Sure.
so
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of different layers. I think a lot of Asian Americans like in America, right? We're kind of like in between these two worlds where
Mm.
I'm not Asian enough for like the age true Asians because like I've never even been to Asia, like right. So it's like
Yeah.
I don't fit in with like the Asians that are like, when they speak another language, right? Because I'm super Americanized, but I'm technically like not American in the sense that when people see
Mm.
me, they're like, "Hey, like your English is really good," or like, "Where are you from?" And I'm like, "Oh, I was born in
Yeah.
Jersey." They're like, "No, like where are you from?" I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I lived in California for like 5 years." It's like,
Mm.
"No, no," and then I'm like, "Oh, you're asking like where my parents are from?"
Like my
Okay,
ethnicity. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it's always like an interesting dynamic. But I think there's been a lot of progress actually in terms of because I think growing up, when you turn on TV or you're watching any movie, like the
Mm.
Asian guy never gets the girl, right? It's usually they're
Mm.
the ones that are getting bullied and picked on, and um, yeah, it's not usually not a good look on us, right? So you grow up with a
Mm.
lot of these insecurities. And then nowadays, like because there's like a lot more representation, I'm like, whoa, like there are movies where like the Asian male is actually it's usually the opposite. It's usually like the white male lead gets like the Asian female, right? And then so
Huh.
there's a lot
Interesting.
of complexities there, but I do think there's a lot more representation, but I think that did lead to a lot of insecurities and a lot of most of my clients are Asian men, right? And that's something that they've struggled with as well. So it's
Mm.
interesting, like and then, when I went to college, I was a part of an Asian fraternity. And then it was like, and then that's like a completely opposite, like hyper masculine environment where it was just about
Mm.
like, oh, how many girls can we pick up at the club? And then, so I was thrown into that world. I'm like, whoa, like this is crazy. So it's a bit of a complex, but yeah, very unique
Mm.
circumstance, I guess.
And it's one that you're Asian American, but the reality is there's a lot of other minorities um who can understand that and speak to that feeling of like I belong but I don't belong, even just from an ethnic standpoint. And I know the question that you're getting, and so we're adopting a little boy from the Pacific island of Samoa, and this is
Hmm.
something that I have had to learn over the last
Yeah.
5 years because of this very thing. Again, very white, very European American, so I don't have this from an experience standpoint, but understanding like what is it that somebody's really asking, right? Because some
Mm.
of us don't even understand the question we're trying to ask. And I had a great podcast guest kind of help me understand the difference between your nationality versus your ethnicity versus your
Yeah.
race, right?
Hmm.
Like you're white, like by race, like, the color of
Hmm.
your skin from a medical standpoint would be considered white, but your
Hmm.
nationality is American because that's your
Yeah.
citizenship, but your ethnicity is Asian/Asian American. And it was
Mm.
so helpful
Hmm.
for me to understand because it's just putting words and language to what feels very complex and we can't quite say.
Hmm.
So, for those of you wondering, like I know what Davidson's saying, like this is what I've also wondered sometimes, how do I ask this? What you're asking about is someone's ethnicity. Like what's your
Right.
ethnicity?
Yeah. Oh, I'm Vietnamese American. I always say I'm Vietnamese American.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, that it's so insightful. Now, in terms of growing up, are both of your parents Vietnamese or is one? What's your
Yeah,
ethnic
yeah,
history?
it's interesting, right? All of my Vietnamese friends, well, I can't say all because that's very hyperbolic, but many of my Vietnamese friends also grew up like without a father, and I think
Mm,
it's different times, right? Like a lot of trauma from the war. So,
mm,
growing up, a lot of us were abused, right? Whether it's
mm,
emotional or physical, like that was just the norm. So
mm,
I thought, and then a lot of Asians, we joke about it. We're like, oh yeah, like that's normal. Like that's how they show love, right? Like by beating you. But then
mm,
growing up, you're kind of like, huh, is this normal? But there's
mm,
consequences to that, right?
mhm,
So it's just interesting. Like I do think that and many of my Vietnamese friends that didn't have a father, they're actually very, very successful now because they always feel like they have like a chip on. Like I also feel like I have a chip on my shoulders. Like, all right, well, let me just prove to everyone that I can make it despite
mm,
the circumstances. But I
mm,
think some of it was channeled in the wrong way. And now I'm like, okay, like instead of looking for the external validation, like let me explore within and see what I want versus like me trying to prove to others like, someone who grew up poor can make it, right? So now I have a better relationship and I do it because I want to and not because like, oh, I need to like prove myself or
mm.
or something like that.
Yeah, it's so insightful what you're saying. Do you see this in other cultures within America, like subcultures? Because
Hmm.
what you're describing, I feel like I have heard other, ethnicities talk about sort of a
Hmm.
a ethnic trauma, in a sense, not that we can generalize to everybody, but
Yeah.
in your conversations with people, have you made any correlations? Do you feel like there's bonding with other minorities, other ethnicities? And certainly there are too, let me also
Yeah.
throw this out here. There are certainly European white men and women who can also very much relate to what you're saying, like what you're
Mm.
feeling.
True.
Like
True.
I will also acknowledge that the emotions that you're
Mhm.
describing. However, there is a unique element then when you add that ethnic minority. So I'm just
Hmm.
curious in your experience, like have you kind of made these connections with anyone else?
This is such a weird thing to say because it sounds like you
Do
have a
it,
pretty
do
big
it. Here we
podcast
are.
this way, but so I would say, and this is processing this took a lot of therapy, a lot of
Yes. Yeah.
self-development. So I'll just be honest. It
Amen.
honestly like, and I'm sure I'm not the only person that does this, but I think I made like the straight white man, middle-aged white man, like the enemy for pretty much my whole life,
Mm,
right?
mm,
And but then I didn't even realize like a lot of it was unconscious because I was a part of so many of these ethnic groups, being a leader for some of them and just hosting all these events that it was you hear and you're like, man. And then I realized like, okay, well, that's not really gonna, if that's like a us versus them mentality, which is not really
mm,
gonna help the situation, right?
mm,
So to answer your question, yes, like any minority for whatever reason, unconsciously, I would just gravitate towards them, and we would just connect like right off the bat, right?
Mm,
But then now I realize, like reflecting on my journey, I'm like, actually, there were a lot of like the enemy, like white men who were like
yeah.
amazing mentors who really have helped me, who really like believed in me, and now I have a much better, more empowering context. But I would say for the most of my life, I was like, they're evil and we're good, right? It was like not a healthy way to live life, you know?
Mm-hmm. And to validate this, not that you need it, but I have heard that before, and I can understand how it can happen, whether it be through media, etc. Like again, it's the white guy that gets the girl. It's the white guy that becomes president. It's the like I totally can
Mm,
see how the subconscious narrative is there. I guess the follow-up question then, obviously I'm not a male, but for people listening, hindsight vision being 2020, what would be your encouragement, advice, support for the white man, for the white woman,
mm,
um, to help maybe alleviate that earlier? And again, we can only control our own behavior, so we realize like we can't control someone else's behavior. But do you have
mm,
any thoughts to how we can help bridge that journey, or at least help
mm,
speed it up so that we
mm.
are behaving in a way that is not contributing to that narrative
Yeah,
on our end?
I think curiosity as a way of being, like what you're doing right now, like it's very evident that you just want to know, and like you just want to like, how can I
Mm,
contribute? I mean,
mhm.
I think some of it is like self-learning, right? I think it's like reading the books. Like I've read a ton of, Malcolm X, like all these biographies, right? A lot of some of these books are very confronting. So I do think do it in moderation, because I think
Yeah.
if we overdo it, then it can be a lot
Yes.
to be with.
It's good
Um,
advice.
but I think um yeah, I mean, I typically try to reach out when I hear something, whether it's like BLM or just anything, right? It's like I reach out, and with my Jewish friends, I'll reach out and see like, hey, like what's going on? Like, I'm here for you. Do you want to talk about it? And then
Mm-hmm.
and I try to do it from genuine curiosity, right? Like try to be objective, even though that's like almost impossible. And people usually appreciate. They're like, thanks, Davidson. Like it was nice just to have someone listen, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, I'm not perfect by any means, right? But I do try to in my spare time, whether it's like reading books or watching documentaries, and it's I'm a very emotional person, so I cry a lot when when I do read
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
and yeah, and just like the struggles that women have to deal with, right? And all these
Mm-hmm.
different things. But at the end of the day, I think we all like people have good intentions, right? I think it's how we perceive it as well, right? Because sometimes
Mm-hmm.
I'll receive things that's like a microaggression, but it's like, okay, well, I didn't do anything to correct them, or I didn't, and sometimes it is confronting when I'm like, hey, like what you said, like that was kind of messed up. Like that actually didn't
Mm-hmm.
really land well with me. It's like, and just have a conversation. And sometimes like a lot of my white friends have blocked me, and like, because I'm probably the only person that has been like, hey, dude, like, I'm just been processing this during therapy, but like working with that, a lot of the racist jokes you guys made when we worked together, like actually like it was pretty traumatizing, but then
Mm-hmm.
afterwards then they get all defensive, and then like they end up blocking me.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, hey, even if I planted that seed of like, hey, maybe I should kind of think twice before,
Yeah.
maybe it had an impact, maybe it didn't, but at least I was able to set
Yeah.
those boundaries.
Yeah, I appreciate that insight. I'm hearing that the concept of curiosity, and as I have said before, I think it's the art of asking better questions in general as humanity. Instead of assuming things, we just need to get better at asking questions. And that does not
Mm,
necessarily mean that we agree on the answer. This is where people miss the boat is, you know, 100 I guarantee there are things that you and I would probably fundamentally disagree on, right? But that shouldn't prevent us from being able to have open dialogue and discussion
mm,
because we're still human, made in the image of
yeah.
God, worthy of loving and being loved in return. And that puts us on the same
Mm,
playing field, period. End of story. And so we can still hear each other's perspectives um, in a
mm,
way that is loving and intentional and with a heart of genuine desire to see the other person succeed in life. So I love
Mm.
that. Be curious. I will throw in the concept of how to practically live that out is ask better questions, ask more questions. Don't make assumptions. Um, so insightful. I love that. And then one of the things that you said is moving forward, through your life, that it wasn't just a career ladder pursuit for you. It was kind of out of necessity, as you've kind of alluded to. Tell us specifically, from a career standpoint, what you're doing and how you're helping people, because then what I would really like to dive into is steps to overcoming that self-criticism, that you have
Mm.
not only done in your own life, but how you've helped other people. But
Mm.
initially, just tell us like where you are now, how you're serving people.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the seed that was planted. I was very lucky to work at LinkedIn, which is a hate to use the word
Mm,
woke like organization, but LinkedIn really just tries to actively create a environment of like self-discovery and a lot of like the DE&I and a lot of diverse. So even with me like just being in spaces with white women, I was like, oh wow, like that's if now I can relate because it feels what they're describing feels exactly what I feel like when I'm usually like the only Asian person in out of all the sales teams or when
mm,
people just assume I'm the IT guy, or something like that, right?
yes.
So I'm like, huh.
Or that you play the
So,
piano really well.
yeah, yeah,
I
or that
just
I'm good
had
at
someone
math.
who's Asian say that, and I was like, "Hi, I've never actively thought about that, but I can see what you're saying."
But so that safe space of being at LinkedIn and just like that environment where everyone is more open and there's just a ton
Yeah.
of diversity there across the board.
Mm,
That was when I published Redefining Masculinity, which the purpose of that book, why I published that was because I felt like men didn't have a safe space where we can process and cry and just be vulnerable and just share a lot of these different experiences and challenges that we have as men and trying to act strong and be, so Lewis Howes' Mask of Masculinity, I think was like a big inspiration for me to
mm,
to go on this journey. And then I do think like just seeing with my dad and how his dad beat him and why my dad beat
yeah.
me was like, oh, okay, like that's just a cycle, right? So it's like, okay, how can I break the cycle? How can I foster and have spaces where so with my men's group, like having men like talk about, what it was like to lose their parent or,
Mm,
thoughts of suicide and depression, to just create these spaces and all of that created helped me be able to see, huh, like this is a lot more rewarding than the boatloads of money I would have made if I just continued on the path of like tech sales. But I'm
mm.
like, let me leave that all behind and decide to do something that's more passion and more mission driven. So that's a long way of saying like all these instances help me be able to see like, okay, I'm on the right path.
I love that. Um, we're gonna dive in really shortly to your expert advice on conquering self-criticism, creating bold impact, your daring hearts community. It's so cool. But first, we're gonna play a round of Would You Rather. Davidson didn't know we were doing this. He's ready for it. He's game.
Let's do it.
Let's do what he says. Okay. Would you rather be a ninja or a pirate?
Pirate.
Oh, pirate. Most people say ninja. Why a pirate?
The thought of just traveling to so many different countries and
Yeah.
just like that, it sounds like a adventurous
Plundering
life.
villages. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. I always say like I want to be a ninja on a pirate ship. All
Oh,
best of both worlds. I was literally just thinking this the other day. I forget I saw a picture of like an old world wooden boat. And I had the thought, like, what's wild to me is once upon a time when we think ship, we think like cruise ship, right? With all the
hmm.
lights but this is like total off the subject. Welcome to the podcast. Um, but like once upon a time for years and years when you were on a ship, like it must have been so dark and quiet and creepy. You know what I mean? Like you're out in the middle of the ocean and you don't have like
Yeah,
electronic lights that you can just flip on. And then a massive storm.
crazy.
How do you even keep your lamps? Like it just hit me
Yeah.
like, man, how we just have no idea.
It reminds me of I read this book. Did you hear about there was a guy who was a fisherman who was like on a super small boat where his like motor died, so he was floating across the Pacific for like
It gives me
565.
palpitations just thinking
Is that
about it.
crazy? Yes, 500 plus days. And
Oh
when he
my
finally
gosh.
was saw humans again, he like didn't know how to react. Like he was
Yeah.
just like yeah, it
How did
was
he eat?
this is the craziest story. So he would wait till the seagulls and the birds land. Like so he would have to be like sneaky about it, right? Because like if they
Yeah,
know that
super
they're
still.
about to get eaten, and then as soon as they were, because they would just swarm around him, and then as soon as like they got tired and they needed to rest, as soon as they got on the boat, he had to like sneak in and grab them, and then he would just lay them out to like dry so that because like or else it'd be like
Hmm.
super raw, right? But then the sun
Hmm.
was so strong that it kind of cooked like some of those birds. Yeah,
That's
it's wild.
outrageous. Is there a name to this book? Is there a title to it?
Let me see, three something days and see. I'll look it up. It's
Yeah, he's gonna look it up, you guys. I know some of you are already like,
okay.
wait, I want to read that book.
438 days, an extraordinary true story of survival at sea.
And who's the author?
So this is because this was in another language, but then okay,
Okay.
Jonathan Franklin was the guy who translated it. Yeah.
Okay, Jonathan Franklin. And uh my editor just make a note. We'll make sure that's included in the show notes. So fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, he still wants to be a pirate, just maybe not lost at sea for 400 plus days. You are allowed to change your answer. Um, okay. Would you rather winter or summer?
I I personally like summer better.
Same. That is the definitive answer, people. You weirdos who like winter. Oh my gosh. I'm like looking at the rain. I'm cold right now. I have a blanket on me.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, when is summer? Okay. Would you rather a pancake or a waffle?
I like waffle.
You like waffle? Do you have a certain way that you eat? Some people are real passionate about waffles. Like they grew up eating them a certain way, and this is nostalgic, and you can't make it any other way. I didn't know this was a thing. Apparently, it's a thing.
Oh, I didn't know that. I just like it extra crispy. Like I like the texture because it's so
Mm.
crispy. Like I like yeah, my wife and I love texture. That's what we realized. Like everything she eats, she doesn't necessarily eat for flavor, she eats for texture. And I'm like, huh,
Fascinating. Huh.
yeah.
So she could just go out and eat leaves from from the tree. I mean, in that case, I yes. She's probably very easy to please then. I'm not so easy to please.
It's funny. We had this conversation. Like she's the most low maintenance when it comes to food. Like she's happy with like McDonald's and or Taco Bell. And I'm like, this is crazy. You're the only person I know that doesn't like fine dining.
That's
Like
hilarious. I mean, it's texture. She doesn't care. That's hilarious. What's her name?
Samantha.
Samantha. Samantha, listen. We should be friends. You should teach me your ways so I'm less picky in life. Um, okay. Last question, although you may have already somewhat answered this. Would you rather a personal jet or a private yacht?
Oh, that's so, dude,
You're a
this is
pirate, so we've
hard.
already picked the pirate ship.
Yeah, but oh man, dude, this is hard. Yeah, I would choose a yacht. You're right. I would choose a yacht.
Yeah. Yeah, he's going
Yeah.
somewhere warm. Where are you and Samantha going on your yacht? You're docking and you're not leaving because you like summer too.
Yeah, I think we like the Asian countries,
Okay,
I
where would
like
you go? I am not familiar about like where I would even go if I had a yacht and I wanted to go to an Asian country.
mm,
Where's a good place to go?
I think Korea and Japan would be the first stop. First two
Okay.
stops.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is there any one place specifically there that you would want
Ooh,
to go?
that's tough. If I could choose one, I would say what's that place that has like really good milk? It's known for good milk in
Oh,
Japan. You know
I
what
have
I'm
no
talking
idea.
about?
No. I didn't know that there was
Uh,
like really good milk. What is really good milk? Like their cows are
So
extra special
yeah, you know how like they're like Japan's known for like they like massage their like the cows and like super tender. What's that called? The Kobe,
What?
Kobe
Oh, yes, the meat.
Wagyu,
Okay, I did
the
know that.
Wagyu.
Yes, Wagyu.
Yeah.
Steak.
So
Yeah.
similar concept. There's a place where like they just treat their cows like really, really well. Like they love them, they care for them,
They get
and because of
massages as
that,
well.
yeah.
Man, I should be a cow in Japan, apparently. That is
Now,
so
now I have to look it
interesting.
up. Which place sounds good? Okay. Because now it's
I'm
gonna
so
bother me that I
curious
don't
now.
remember. Yeah. Once I say it, you'll know. Oh, Hokkaido. Okay.
I did
Hokkaido.
not know that.
So so th
The Wagyu meat, I did know that, the Wagyu steak.
So this is why it's good. The region has a cool climate and wide pastures with fresh air, and it's like because it's a stress-free environment. So they just are able to live healthier lives. So because in America we just cram them like in like a little thing, right? Like
I was
there's
gonna say, forget the cows. I'm gonna go to Japan and live in the pasture. It sounds great. I might produce
uh,
better too if I'm living in that environment. In general,
touche.
that's so funny. I do actually need a Wagyu steak. That's on my bucket list. I can never justify the
Hmm.
price, but I love steak.
Yeah, it's expensive.
Yeah, it really is. Well, now that we've settled all the important things in life, uh, um, you in your Daring Hearts community, you can talk to us a little bit about that. But one of the things that you talk about, you address, I mentioned in my intro that you have this massive YouTube channel. Um, and clearly something that you are communicating is resonating with people. You're meeting people where they are and kind of creating this idea of like this daring hearts type of living, living with bold impact. But in order to do that, you do have to overcome this sense of self-criticism. This, what you said, was a life kind of focused on finding external validation, which many of us do, whether we realize it or not, regardless of how traumatic or not our upbringing was. So I think we all struggle with this to some degree. But just talk to us a little bit about practical steps to start overcoming
Hmm.
self criticism. Because until we are doing that, this concept of
Hmm.
living life with bold impact is only ever going to be a dream, not a
Yeah, that's a great
reality. So
question.
talk
That's
to me about self criticism.
so this is an interesting exercise that I'm sure not many people do, but I I I assert that we're not the best examples of what we're really good at because we take it for granted, right? So there's certain things that you're
Hmm.
really good at, every person's really good at. So it's we're so good at it, it's like almost like unconscious at this point, right?
Mm.
So if you go up to 30 different, like the first 30 people that come to mind could be a mixture of friends, family, coworkers, and just ask them like, hey, like what are my strengths and weaknesses?
Hmm.
And it's interesting because a lot of people will say things that you wouldn't expect, right? Because it's just like things that that you do. And we're usually a lot harder on ourselves than what other people, like the 30 closest people to you would say about you. So, and you can even ask like, hey, when I walk into a room, what do I bring with me? And people will share your aura, which I think a lot of that you don't, it's really nice to hear. And that exercise always wows everyone because people are like, sometimes people cry because they're just like, yeah, like, my best friend said like it's the nicest thing about me, and I've never heard
Mm.
anyone like speak about me that way,
Mm. Mm.
Um, and that's been really interesting to see people because I'll do it when I'm on the phone with them, I'll or when I'm next to them, I'll be like, okay, call 10 people right now, and I'll just sit while they do that exercise, and I'm always like, man, this it never gets old,
Mm.
what people say
Mm.
about each other. Yeah.
Mm. I love that one. And you know what you just communicated, and tell me if I'm saying this wrong, but what I'm hearing you say is this concept that what what we are actually really good at, because it is so close to us and so second nature, we don't even appreciate that it is something that we're good at. And ironically, what we think we're good at might actually not be what other people are seeing as clearly, because we have probably intentionally grown at that thing. And
Mm.
so we see the growth and maybe other people do, but it's not actually our superpower that comes very
Mm.
naturally that we've been
Mm.
given. And so I love that.
Mm.
I love that exercise. Um, that's such a good one. That's such a good one. So you do that, you talk to somebody, ask them, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Be willing to hear it and receive it. And then what do you do with it? So you're told that, but
Yeah.
right, it's only true if you believe it to be true in your own life. It's true
Mm.
regardless of you, but it's not going to make a difference in your life unless you believe it to be true.
Right. That's a fair point. This and then so the second portion of this exercise, and this could be confronting for a lot of people as well, but
Mhm.
we're doing it, we're projecting it unconsciously anyways, right? So this is just like the conscious step in doing this, which is we write down 15 things that make us sad and 15 things that make us angry. And a lot of and just the act of writing it out, it's like, oh yeah. And then we name it, and then this is where we bring levity and play to it, where we kind of like make fun. So we call it something that's three words for it. That's usually, well, three sayings that are usually two words that are like oxymoronic. And I call this like the survival mechanism. So
Mm,
mine are called judgmental guru, big hero no, and optimistic orphan. So this is when I'm in my survival, right? When I'm triggered, when
mm,
I'm reacting. So we all have some version of that, right?
mhm,
So my judgmental guru means that when I'm like triggered, I think I'm like everyone's guru. So it's like I think I know better, right? But then no
mm,
one wants to be told what to do, right? They want to discover it for themselves. So it's not the optimum place to come from. The optimistic orphan is like I use optimism as a way of not being able to be with the sadness and the anger and the reality, which is sometimes the pain and hurt in society. But I use optimism almost as like a it's like oh, everything will be okay. But I think sometimes it is helpful to like be with it and process it, you know.
mhm,
And the orphan is just like how I perceive myself as an orphan, but in reality, I have like 18,000 LinkedIn connections. I'm going to networking events every day, but I just view myself as like alone and as an orphan. So it's just not the reality, right? But that's just
mhm,
when I'm triggered. And then the last one, big hero no, is like I feel like, and a lot of men do this, is like we try to save everyone, right? But it's like people are fully capable of helping themselves. Like they don't need anyone to save them, you know?
mhm,
So once you go through that exercise, like it's probably the most eye-opening thing. And
mhm,
then the levity portion is like, hey, oh, like I'm being the orphan again, so it's kind of like
mm,
just having that self-awareness and just pausing and then calling it out so that it's not consuming us or controlling us unconsciously.
hmm. And so what you said is you write down 15 things that make you sad
Mhm.
and then 15 things that make you happy.
Oh, angry,
Oh,
angry.
angry. Sorry, not
Yeah.
happy. So okay, that make you sad and angry, and then you're creating those statements based on those two lists. Is that what you're
Hmm.
saying?
Yeah,
So
so
you're
you look
taking
for
one from sad and one from angry and you're combining them?
So you look for common themes, right? Because people might say like when I've done this exercise many times. So some people would be like, human trafficking or ch domestic violence, like, child abuse, or, when
Hmm.
people make fun of like the LGBT, like so everyone kind of writes down all of their
Yep.
stuff, right? Stuff that like triggers them. But you'll notice that there's like three common themes amongst like all of them usually. So that's when the naming part comes in. So for me, like if I was to do it, like, we talked a lot about racism, right? So a lot of my stuff was around like social injustice and,
Hmm.
like human trafficking, and just like a lot of
Hmm.
things that make me sad. So, and then I remember when I first did this exercise, it was around how like I was sad that people make excuses and they don't live up to their full potential, right? But then when I make it about others, I'm actually projecting my own insecurities, right? It's
Mm.
what I can't be within myself that are just reflected from others, right? So once you go through the exercise and you look and you take, it probably takes like an hour to an hour and a half to like really do it right, right? Because it's like, we're writing things that are really
Yeah.
confronting. But once we
Yeah.
name it, and then the next practice is like for the next week, like just notice and just make a tally. Like maybe if you have like a little post-it in your pocket, every time we're being any of those, write down the three survival mechanism and just make a note. And then by the end of the week, you'll be like, wow, I was in survival mechanism like 21 times. Like that I was actually
Mm,
conscious of. But then it just helps us realize like, and then we can choose survival mechanism or we can choose essence, which essence is the exercise where you go up to your 10 closest friends and you ask them, when I walk into a room, what do I bring with me? And then, people
yeah.
will say like positivity, optimism, like good energy, good vibes. And then you
Hmm.
write all that down and then you come up with, you look for themes and you come up with like 5 essence words. So I can
Hmm.
choose to come from brilliance, partnership, optimism, heart, um, or I can choose from survival mechanism, right? It's like every moment I get to choose. So
Mm.
that's like a simple exercise, but it really helps us like shift from fight, flight, or freeze into more of our essence.
Hmm. I love that. And I can see how in doing so, you're almost reprogramming your brain to instead of focus on all of the negatives that you feel are lacking, that self-criticism, to an abundance mentality is really what you're doing. It's like you're flipping the script on the way
Yeah.
that you're thinking about yourself. And I also like that you're partnering with the people around you. I think that's a key
Mm,
piece that a lot of even I would say coaches or transformational coaches miss
mm,
is needing to bring in the perspective of others as well. It's like that community element where we don't
mm,
do life alone. We shouldn't be doing life alone. And there's a lot of value in hearing the people who know you and love you and are in your corner, to be clear, not,
mm,
Joe Schmo on the street, but to hear like how they perceive you. And I think that's really beautiful. I like that that's part of what you're having people do. So that was lovely. And for those of you listening and watching, if you need to pause, I encourage you to rewind and take notes on what he just said, because if you missed it, that was like, I think, a 3 or 4 step, um, very, very practical way of helping overcome self criticism that you can do tomorrow, you can do next week in your own life. Talk to
yeah.
us a little bit about the Daring Hearts community. So, you this is just a small bit of what you do within your community, but tell us more about that.
Yeah. So I started this community because I nerd out. I mean, it sounds like you're super into self-development as well. So I I said yes to every like mastermind, every coach, and I mean at this point I've worked with over like 15 coaches. So I've spent
Wow.
over
Yeah.
$150,000 in 8 years, right? So
Yeah.
I'm not that crazy, but I mean that still probably sounds like a lot to most people, right?
Yeah.
And all these like coaching certifications, like getting the EQI and going to all the Tony Robbins, like going to Fiji, all these different modalities. And I was like, all right, I think like each of these programs are good in certain aspects, but I'm like, let me like try to solve for what I perceive I didn't get, right? Which is more of
Yeah.
like the long term, like a year long, because the Tony Robbins thing is good. Like you're pumped for those 5 or 4 or 3 days, depending on which programs you do. But
Yeah.
what about the other three? What about the other 300 and something days, right? So that's
Mhm.
why I decided to create Daring Hearts. And and I think what's to your point, like when I asked the 30 people, like, hey, what do I do really well? Everyone's like, you just like take action and you're like not afraid
Mm.
to be vulnerable and just put yourself out there. So I'm like,
Mhm.
that's my gift to the world. Like I'm gonna show people
Mhm.
to be more vulnerable and not be afraid of just putting themselves out there. So
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah,
So
it's
what does the Daring Hearts community do? So if somebody was signing up like on your website at davidsonhung.com, hang.com,
hmm.
um, what does that client experience look like? What is somebody signing up for?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. So on this journey, I've met like incredible people like yourself, right? So there's like a big component of mentorship because I do think so there's a lot of guest speakers. So there's going to be
Mm.
26 guest speakers that I dent that are a panel discussion event where they'll
Mhm.
teach like a framework, like a practical framework, like similar to the one I teach today. So each of them have their own
Mhm.
framework that you can apply to life and you could pick and choose depending on where you're at, right? And all the topics are around like passion, fulfillment, ikigai, like so it's all like self-development related topics. But it's going to be a lot more holistic because when I went to all these different programs, like I felt like some were good for like mindset, and then some were good for just physical health, some were good for nutrition. some were good for meditation, but I didn't see any program that was like super holistic that encompassed like a little bit of everything, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
so that's why I'm like, this would be great because you're exposed to everything and then you can pick and
Mhm.
choose. Like I'm sure you're not going to practice every meditation, everything, but at least now you know you learned it and then you could use it whenever it serves you.
Mhm. So it's a community, it's a virtual community, and you have these opportunities to take these courses. Is that what it is? Or like how do you pay monthly or how do you get involved?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a monthly subscription and so you'll get well there's different tiers, but the most common tiers you get one it's a weekly call for an hour. And then every other week you'll speak to the panels and you can have Q&A, you can ask them questions.
Mhm.
So that's like the mentorship piece. And then the other weeks we'll be going through some of the frameworks that I mentioned. Like that was an example of one of the frameworks, and then all of these are there's a component of e-learning as well. So they'll have all these modules online. So maybe 8 months later, they're like, "Hey, I know we learned this week 5, but I kind of forgot." You can go back and download the exercises and do it at your own pace as well. If because sometimes you're like, "Oh, I learned this, but I haven't practiced it as much. Let me go back and just
Yeah.
redo it."
Or there's like a season, maybe you're especially struggling with self-criticism in 3 months, but not right now. And so you go back and need to do that exercise. Yeah. Who does
Exactly.
this Daring Hearts program, who does it best serve? Who's like the best person to benefit from? I mean, obviously we could all
Mm.
learn from these things, but who
Yeah.
especially are you kind of attracting? The person that's here but wants to be here.
It it's I call it like humble high achievers. So people who like on the
Mm,
outside, like they look very successful, they have all the awards, employee of the month, they're getting promoted, they're
yeah.
making good money, but still feels like something is like missing. Like there's got to be more to life. It's probably not like making an extra 50,000 more,
Yeah.
and those are the seekers, like those are the people that tend to gravitate towards me because it's always we're
Yeah.
solving what we were like a few years
That's
ago,
right.
right?
Yeah. Right.
So
Yeah. That's who you're
yes.
best positioned to serve. I just quoted you, Rory Vaden. Here we are.
Oh, what?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Wait, is that
Love that.
okay? I'm a part of Rory's community as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's how we met. I can't even remember sometimes
Oh,
who
okay.
who I've
Okay. I thought,
who's come
okay.
to me from where.
You're right. Now
But
that you
yes.
mention it, you're right. I was like, oh, what a coincidence. And that's like, okay, that's how we
Wait a second. No, it's so true though. Half the time I don't remember like how people find my podcast. So it's yeah,
yeah.
sometimes we make connections on air and it's like, that's right. That's where
Okay.
I know you from. Yeah, we're both part of the Brand Builders Group. It's a personal brand strategy company, and the owner is Rory Vaden, and he says this quote that many of us love and have quoted many times, but you are best positioned to serve the person you once were, which is exactly what Davidson is doing, and he's rocking it, and he's serving the person, if this is you, who, you're seeing success in life, but maybe it's all external validation. And, that self-criticism exercise, you think like, man, I can see that I would benefit from that exercise. If that's you, then you want to check out Daring Hearts, this virtual community. It's convenient. It's Davidson Hung, HANG.com. The links, of course, will be in the show notes as always. And Davidson, where else can people find you and follow you?
I'm pretty active on social media, similar to you. So it's pretty hard to miss me. Some of my friends say I post too often, but I'm like, you know,
Well, then you can always say unfollow me.
yeah, I'm like, it's my. I was on. I interviewed Holly Cotton. Oh, who you should connect with as well. Actually, she's pretty
Yeah,
interesting. I think you guys would
yeah.
hit it off. Actually, I think she might be an 8 as well. Like now that I'm thinking, like the way she thinks. But oh, why did I mention it? Oh, she said she's like you kind of have to be like obnoxious about it, right? Because she's like you never know because she's like I've published like 9 books, but I still have friends that I'll catch up with and they're like, "Oh, congratulations on your book." And she's like, "Which
Yeah.
one?" It's like, "What do you mean you have more than one book?" And she's like that was confirmation that like you just gotta like
You got to
just
say it 10 million times. Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Well, Davidson's always smiling. You can follow him on YouTube too. I mean, there's some people that they might post too much because their content is not great. It's not because they're posting too much. It's just their content's not that great. Where, Davidson, the same energy that he brings here is what he's bringing to social media. So I love your smile, your encouragement, your optimism, and I just truly pray God's blessing over your heart, your home, Samantha, all that you guys are doing. So it's been an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing. Like the space that you hold and just your grace. Like,
Mm.
and then I love how you were able to switch it up with the funny, right? Because Tony Robbins does this as well. You probably got it from
Mm.
Tony, right? I'm guessing, but
I've actually never seen Tony. I didn't even
oh,
know who he
okay.
was until a couple years ago. Sorry, Tony.
What? Okay, well, you did his main lesson. Well, okay, he has a lot of lessons, but I would say if it's probably the second biggest takeaway, he always says is like pattern interruption. So
Hmm.
by doing the switching it up and doing like the fast rounds, he does this a lot in his teachings as well. But he
Hmm.
said that you're able to get people's energy like higher and then get them to laugh and then they'll let down their guard and they'll be much more vulnerable. So I was like, whoa, she just did what Tony is teaching us, but you did it without even knowing that that's what he was teaching.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you for the validation, though. I still appreciate it. I appreciate it. Tony, I'm sorry I'm not giving you more credit, but I thank you for that. Davidson, it's been an honor.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you for watching the Imperfectly Empowered podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the channel by clicking below. And if you missed our last video, then be sure to check it out right here. We'll see you next time on the podcast. Your story matters and you are loved.